Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, getting you ready for the NFL Draft, which is set to begin April 23rd. That's right, we're just a month away from the NFL Draft. Feels a little different this year, should be, because the NFL Draft, well, it is going to look a little bit different. The venue's changing from the way it sounds with COVID-19. Won't have any fans there. It won't be open to the public for the first time that I can remember. So it's going to look a little bit different, but we're still going to have the draft. And the reason why we continue to put these podcasts together is because, look, we need that distraction. We need an outlet. A lot of people are sheltering in place. We have a lot of, as the businesses are closing down and things like that. And we want to be able to have these outlets to be able to talk sports so that once we get back to life as we know it, we'll have a kind of a direction to go with the NFL and the NFL draft as well. So the NFL draft is set to take place. They are not going to delay the draft there in April. It's just going to look a little bit different in terms of the venue, what it's going to really look like for the public. So sounds like there may be a studio. There won't be any fans, like I said, really, in terms of the social distancing, what really is that going to look like? I'm not really sure. I don't think really anybody knows exactly what that's going to look like, but the NFL is going to be pushing on. The NFL season has started. We've had free agency, a free agent frenzy, if you will. And over the next few days, I'm going to be putting together a series of podcasts, really taking a look at each of the NFL teams. So we're going to go ahead and go division by division, take a look at the rosters, take a look at some of the roster moves that have been made, take a look at where teams are from that standpoint and what those mean for the draft, and then also take a look at who are going to be the best fits for some of those needs. So we're going to start actually in the NFC East. We have a couple of teams who are once again in the top 10 with the Washington Redskins and the New York Giants. And then we'll move from east to west over the course, like I said, of the next few days. Want to make sure that we're bringing these podcasts to you. It's going to be a little bit shorter than my normal podcasts. Probably not a bad thing. But we're going to go ahead and go through, like I said, each of these teams. Really want to take a look at what those needs mean, what we're looking at, and how we're going to go ahead and progress from there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into things. And the Washington Redskins, sitting there at number two overall pick. What has this offseason looked like for them? So in terms of some of the players that they've brought in, Ron Rivera in his first season as head coach there for the Washington Redskins. He's got Jack Del Rio as his defensive coordinator, Scott Turner handling the offense. Up on the offensive line, obviously Trent Williams is the big name there that is still his future is up in the air. Brandon Sheriff is had the franchise tag. You look at Cornelius Lucas from the Bears, Wes Schweitzer from the Falcons, both brought in potentially to man that left side of that offensive line, which was in need of really finding a couple of starters there. Kevin Pierre-Louis brought in as a linebacker as well. So we've seen some of those moves take place. And really, what Ron Rivera is looking to do is he wants to put his stamp on this team. And really the biggest question is going to be Dwayne Haskins. What does he have there with Dwayne Haskins? Is he going to be satisfied with Dwayne Haskins? Or are we going to see Washington potentially take Tua Tagovailoa with the number 2 overall pick? I don't see that happening right now. I don't. It's kind of weird. Are we going to see Josh Rosen too? And you hear a lot of people talking about that, and it could happen. I just don't know that Ron really wants to go in that direction. He's a guy who wants to bring toughness to the defense, and adding a guy like Chase Young makes a whole lot of sense. Taking a look at some of the guys that they've lost, Josh Norman, the veteran corner, was let go. He's now in Buffalo. Case Keenum Backup quarterback is gone, but they've traded for Kyle Allen, whom Ron Rivera coached there in Carolina. Eric Flowers, the guard, he's moved on to Miami. Reason for Wes Schweitzer coming aboard. Michael Burton, the fullback, he's in New Orleans. Colt McCoy, another quarterback, has moved on as well. But when you look at this team, not only those other moves that I talked about, you see Ron Rivera bringing in some of the guys that he wants to build his culture around. So he has Thomas Davis, who he coached in Carolina, coming back, and he's going to be one of those linebackers, probably on the interior of that linebacking core. Sean Davis from Pittsburgh, free safety. Kendall Fuller, only 25 years of age. Played well in the Super Bowl there for Kansas City. He's going to be there at corner in the secondary. J.D. McKissick, an interesting player, was a receiver in college at Arkansas State. Now more of a running back. Moved on to the Redskins from Detroit. So those are pretty much the names that you're seeing right now for Washington. And frankly, in terms of these moves, none of them are real big moves, but you can kind of see, some of the defensive players that he's bringing in, some guys especially that he's familiar with. Having Thomas Davis, the veteran presence there on that in that linebacking core, already has John Bostic and Cole Holcomb. So you add Thomas Davis in there. You have Montez Sweat, Ryan Kerrigan. So this is the thing. Ryan Anderson's already out there on the linebacking core as well. A couple of moves that we just saw. Let's see, Quentin Dunbar, their corner, he's moved on. I traded him to Seattle. That was a recent transaction that just happened today. And so when you look at this team, what direction are they going to go? It is still possible that they go with a quarterback, because defensively is their biggest need an edge rusher. I'd argue that, if Ryan Kerrigan, who's going to be a free agent at the end of the year, I think that's really going to be the biggest question, because Ryan Kerrigan has been kind of the workhorse for them. 31 years of age, he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. And when you look at Ryan Kerrigan, this guy has basically been the heart and soul of the Washington Redskins defense. Kerrigan, let's see, in the last year of his 5-year, $57.5 million contract, and up until this year with Ryan Kerrigan, 120 straight games before a concussion kept him out of the lineup. Ultimately, a calf injury sent him onto IR in January. Still managed 5.5 sacks. But, the question that you have there is what about the durability? Is he finally starting to break down? Is he going to return to form in 2020? You have Montez Sweat there also on the outside. He had a nice rookie season there with 7 sacks. Matt Ioannidis, really not expecting the defensive end to be as productive, but led the way with 8.5 sacks. Washington actually, 10th in the league in sacks with 46. So you could make an argument that there isn't a need there, but that comes to that age-old question: do you draft for need or do you draft for the best player available? Best player available, hands down, is going to be Chase Young. I mean, the 6'5", 265-pound defensive end out of Ohio State. There's no question when you watch him play. The 16.5 sacks, just how explosive he is, the violence with his hands coming off the edge. He is a special player. You add him to this roster, it's one of those things to where if Ryan Kerrigan can't return to form, then you have a backup plan. And look, if you have Kerrigan, Sweat, and Chase Young, you're going to find a way to have all three of them out there on the field. And that's going to affect the other, the opposition. That's going to affect their passing attack. And with Chase Young coming off the edge as well, he's a guy who can play the run. He can set the edge. He's one of those guys who reads the run play and puts himself in a position to make a play behind the line of scrimmage. So this notion that, there's not a need for Chase Young when he's the best player available, you got to go forward and make that play. You got to take him at number 2 overall. So when you look at Washington, you move on from that. Their next pick there in round number 3, because they don't have a second round pick that was traded to Indianapolis. In round number 3, 66 overall, I'm looking at them taking an offensive tackle. We talked about them bringing in Cornelius Lucas, and to me, Cornelius Lucas feels like a swing tackle. I wouldn't say that he's going to be a guy that's going to have that starting role. You have Morgan Moses at the right tackle position. The question really remains what's going to happen with Trent Williams. And are they going to trade him? Is he going to remain on the roster? He's got a new head coach in there in Ron Rivera, so there is a chance that Trent Williams is back. But look, he's in the final year of his 5-year, $68 million contract, so you really have to think about life without him. And Lucas just signed a 2-year deal worth $3.8 million. So he'll be, after the 2021 season, he'll be a free agent. I think you really have to find your offensive lineman of the future. And I have him taking Matt Peart out of UConn. And this is a kid who, he's got tremendous size, tremendous length, 6'7", 318 pounds, 36 and 5/8 inch arms. Ran a 5.06 40 at the combine. A guy who, when you talk about flexibility, this is one of the guys that I look at him and he he gets so low in his stance, and the flexibility, his ability to bend for a guy his size. You don't really see his pad level creep up too much there. He is still raw, needs to work on his footwork a little bit, needs to work on the technique, make sure that the hands match the feet, but he has a lot of upside. The athleticism is off the charts, the mirror skills. I think, that's something else that you really see with Matt Peart. So I thought that was a nice move for them there in round number 3. Now, if you move on for Washington, you go on to round number 4, sitting there at number 108. And we haven't talked about their wide receivers, but Dwayne Haskins is going to need some help there at the wide receiver position. You have Terry McLaurin, Kelvin Harmon, Trey Quinn as the leading receivers there for this group, but there really isn't any depth behind them to really speak of. So I think this is something where if I were Washington sitting there, I have a lot of guys who could be possession receivers, especially, Trey Quinn, surprising as the former Mr. Irrelevant, really showing off his hands. Kelvin Harmon, I think they got late. He was a 5th rounder. Terry McLaurin, so a lot of young guys on this receiving core. They may add a veteran receiver when it's all said and done in free agency. Right now Terry McLaurin is the wide receiver 1, but I actually have them taking Lynn Bowden Jr. out of Kentucky. And Lynn Bowden Jr., look, if you haven't seen this kid play, he's a receiver, but when injury really hit the quarterback position, he was thrust into playing the quarterback position. And you want to talk about a kid who is just dynamic. You think about guys like Antoine Randall L. And Lynn Bowden Jr. is a guy that can definitely fall into that category. You look at the numbers, and just 100, just a little over 1,300 yards receiving in his 3 years there with the Wildcats, but over 1,400 yards on the ground, 13 touchdowns, 7.9 yards per carry as a quarterback. Now his arm, really wasn't anything to speak of. Just completed 47.3% of his passes, 3 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions, threw for just 403 yards. But this is a kid who, he's a good returner, 2 punt returns for touchdown back in 2018. Interesting player. This is a guy that you can run a lot of different, a lot of different formations for. If you run a wildcat with him, or you bring him in motion, you wonder, is there a threat to throw? He's somebody who you can line up in the backfield and just really adds that different dimension to the offense. So I like Lynn Bowden Jr. here, and then I actually added another receiver there in round number 4 for the Redskins. So the Skins actually pick number 142 overall, one of the compensatory selections. I went with Bryan Edwards out of South Carolina, 6'3", 212 pounds. The senior, I looked at the receiving core and I said, you know what, this is going to be something that could potentially be a problem for Dwayne Haskins. Whoever's going to be at the quarterback position when it's all said and done for Ron Rivera, you have to have weapons. You have to be able to give them someone to throw the football to. They don't have a bigger receiver, and that's what Bryan Edwards is going to bring you. This is a kid, 234 receptions, model of consistency for the Gamecocks, over 3,000 yards receiving, 22 touchdowns. That made some sense to me. Some people have him coming off the board in round number 3, others in 5. I kind of split the difference. I think he's someone a late 4, just felt right for Bryan Edwards, and I look at the Skins. I think that's the right move to make for them. So those are the first 4 rounds, and that's really what we're going to do throughout this series within the podcast, is taking a look at the first 4 rounds, really talking about the direction that the teams are going to go. So, I think Ron Rivera is going to try to look defense early on, and then we'll see him address the offense for Dwayne Haskins. And then I think, after that, we're probably going to see them look at corner, round number 5, just looking at the cornerback position. There are a lot of guys that are going to be out there. Isang Bassi of Wake Forest, the 5'9", 191-pounder, ran a 4.46 40 at the combine, a tackling machine out there on the outside. I think you could see him go there. I think that would be a nice fit. Kindle Vildor potentially playing the nickel there. 5'10", 191 pounds out of Georgia Southern. Another guy, 4.4 240, but incredibly strong. 22 reps in the bench press, 39.5 inch vertical leap. He could always be off the board before round number 5, but if he's still sitting on the board in round 5, I think that'd be another nice addition there. And then finally, Dane Jackson out of Pittsburgh, 6 foot, 187 pounds, taller corner, ran a 4.57 40, but just a very, very productive player. I think when you talk about Dane Jackson, you think about the ball skills and the pass breakups. A guy who always puts himself in position to make a play, uses his length to his advantage, and back-to-back seasons with at least 10 pass breakups, 39 overall in his career, 4 interceptions to his credit as well, 9 tackles for loss. So this is a guy who is very active, kind of a heat-seeking missile when it comes to the football. So any one of those guys would make a whole lot of sense for Washington in round number 5. So transitioning from the Washington Redskins, we're going to take a look at the New York Football Giants, as Chris Berman likes to call them, and Joe Judge. Joe Judge is in as head coach. Jason Garrett's going to be his offensive coordinator. Patrick Graham manning the defense. And, when you look at this roster, you look at some of the moves that have been made, and you're really trying to figure out what are they going to do with that 4th overall pick. And so I look at the roster. They have made some moves. They needed a corner. And that's one of the things that I really talked about on my website, on the readyforthedraft.com mock draft, was they needed a corner. They needed a number 1. They struggled at times at the cornerback position, especially with Janoris Jenkins leaving mid-season. DeAndre Baker really needed a veteran presence there in the secondary, and lo and behold, they were able to go ahead and pull off getting James Bradbury, the 27-year-old coming from Carolina, signed a 3-year, $43.5 million contract coming on over. They needed to address the linebacker position as well. Brought in a pair of Green Bay Packers, Blake Martinez on the inside, a guy who is a tackling machine, and then Kyler Fackrell coming off the edge, a guy who can put up some sacks. So they have a guy who can put some pressure on the quarterback as well. Levine Toilolo is going to provide some depth at the tight end position. Cameron Fleming, same thing in terms of the offensive tackle, was with Dallas a season ago, signed a one-year deal worth $4 million. Colt McCoy going to be the backup for Daniel Jones as well. They just signed Dion Lewis to be a backup for Saquon Barkley. He's going to do much like he did with Derrick Henry in Tennessee. So the question that's going to remain, some of the guys that that took off. The big name is Mike Remmers there on the right side of the football. Right tackle Mike Remmers. The question really is going to be, what are they going to do with that? With the number 4 overall pick, what's Dave Gettleman going to do? And in my very first mock draft, and usually my gut in my first mock draft seems to actually be a lot more successful than, I give myself more time to think about things. I look at free agency and I start over analyzing things a little bit. That's where I get into a little bit of trouble. So try to make things a little bit different this year. When you look at the Giants and you're looking at the number 4 overall pick, it's going to come down to whether or not they're going to be looking at need. Now, the need is the right tackle, and the best offensive lineman in this draft is Jedrick Wills. Some of the best pass sets that I've seen in this draft came from Jedrick Wills. He's a plug-and-play offensive tackle there out of Alabama, and you can plug him in opposite Nate Solder. You got bookends to protect your investment in Daniel Jones. Also be able to block for Saquon Barkley, your investment. Those are your last 2 first-round picks. Number 6 overall pick, and then before that, the number 2 overall pick. You got to be able to protect these guys. You got to make sure that you're solid up front. They could wait until round number 2, pick up a guy like Austin Jackson out of USC, kind of one of those fringe first rounders there at the offensive tackle position. Is he going to be a first rounder, early second? You'd be able to pick him up in round number 2, I believe. Otherwise, you can also trade up into round number 2 back into round number 1 if you wanted to. But I don't know that you would need to make that move. I think Austin Jackson, there's Lucas Niang out of TCU, another right tackle, even a guy like Isaiah Wilson out of Georgia, the big mammoth offensive tackle, 6'6", 350 pounds. Those guys can be had in round number 2. Why am I talking about the offensive line with round number 2? Well, when you've got a guy sitting there like Isaiah Simmons, you at least take a look at your roster and say, what can I do with this guy? And I'm looking at like the weak side backer. You've got Lorenzo Carter as your starter. You look at free safety, Julian Love right now is kind of the safety. Now that Antoine Bethea, he was released. Marcus Golden was another guy that was released on the outside. So I someone who can replace Marcus Golden rushing the passer. Deone Buchanan also gone. He's on the interior of that linebacking core. Yes, Blake Martinez was brought in, but a guy who could fill in as a starter potentially on the inside of that linebacking core. He can play safety. You can line up Isaiah Williams really just about anywhere. He's kind of that Swiss Army knife. So if you can land Isaiah Simmons as a guy who is one of the top players in this draft, regardless of position, then that's a good chance that you're going to see Dave Gettleman make that move and then be able to still get a right tackle in round number 2. Keep an eye on that. I want to see what if there are any tricks up his sleeve, or if we're going to go ahead and go with need. And looking at things, what Dave Gettleman has done, he's really gone with his need. And the guy that he liked Daniel Jones was not unapologetic, went with his guy, and he stuck with his guns. And he's a guy who likes to build that offensive line. He's really going to look at the trenches, and I ultimately think that this pick is going to be an offensive tackle and not Isaiah Simmons. But keep an eye on my podcast, or I'm sorry, on my mock drafts, and listen to my podcast. There's a good chance that things could change. You need a guy who's going to be able to play the you can almost hear me talking myself into Isaiah Simmons here, because you need a guy who's going to be able to cover the tight end. And that's one of the things that the Giants, you could look at who they have in their division alone with Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz, both with Philly, but then some of the other teams that they're playing, you're going to be seeing, Mark Andrews, You're going to see George Kittle. There are a lot of Pro Bowl tight ends, and who's going to cover them? Alec Ogletree, the inside backer, he was let go, and he was the guy that was really tasked with covering those linebackers. So I'm sorry, those tight ends. So when you look at this roster right now, who's on that roster from the linebacker position? Who's going to cover those tight ends? You really don't have that. Are you going to bring a safety down to line up and cover some of these athletic tight ends? I don't think so. It's not going to happen. You won't be able to have that luxury of being able to do that, especially in 3+ wide receiver sets. So I think Isaiah Simmons may end up being the pick here. But look, I said there was no way that Daniel Jones should have been the number 6 overall pick, especially because I thought that Dwayne Haskins was a better quarterback and a better prospect. And he went ahead and picked Daniel Jones anyway. So when you're looking at need, you're looking at Jedrick Wills, and Jedrick Wills is the guy who I think is ultimately going to be selected. But things could change. Mike Remmers, like I said, he's in Kansas City. I think that has to be priority number 1. And if he makes a free agent move, then we know exactly what he's doing there. With the number 4 overall pick. Could they end up trading back into round 1, getting a tackle? It's entirely possible, but does he want to really take that risk? I think that's going to be the biggest question mark right now. I have them in round 2 actually looking at a pass rusher. Kyler Fackrell brought in, but when you lose a guy like Marcus Golden, who double-digit sack man, you're going to need to find some of that, someone to replace that production. I'm looking at Julian Okora out of Notre Dame, 6'4", 52-pound outside linebacker. Had the season-ending fibula injury that knocked him out. Didn't get to compete at the combine. What you're getting with this guy is an edge rusher with a lot of length, has a really good explosive burst coming off the ball, but he's 6'4", 252, 34 3/8 inch arms, 27 reps in the bench press as well. So he's got some strength to him. I was actually surprised at just how many reps he put up. Given, he looks somewhat lean when you look at him and you figure that he's going to be an outside linebacker coming off the edge. Very productive, over the course of his career. 24 tackles for loss, 15.5 sacks, including 8 in 2018. And this was a guy who was getting to the quarterback in terms of his pressure rate. Wasn't always getting home and actually sacking the quarterback, but he was moving the quarterback off of his mark, being disruptive in the backfield. He and Khalid Kareem, kind of that running mate. And I think you pair him with Kyler Fackrell, you really have 2 edge rushers coming off, putting some pressure on the quarterback. I think that'd be a nice move there on early on day 2. You look at day 3. I'm sorry, at the 3rd round. This is also day 2. They traded away their 68th overall selection to the Jets. Let's see. So they don't have. I'm actually looking to see if I can find them. Don't have a pick early in round number 3, but they do have 99th overall selection, which is a compensatory selection. And we talked about Isaiah Simmons and the number of positions that he could potentially occupy, throughout a given season. And, and really, since we're talking about it, and we're going back to Isaiah Simmons, Pro Football Focus actually did a study on the number of snaps he took at different positions. So 738 defensive plays. He lined up along the defensive line for 106 of those, 239 in the box, 256 as a slot corner, 7 as the boundary corner, and 130 at the deep safety position. So he plays all over the field. I mentioned Julian Love. He's a corner. And right now he's slated as potentially the free safety. So I'm looking at end of round 3. They're going to need to find a free safety. And I have them taking Ashton Davis, the athlete out of Cal, 6'1", 202. This is a track guy. I was looking forward to seeing what he would run at the combine. Wasn't able to do so, but a guy who's still learning the position. rather new to football, and a guy who's just continuing to grow and progress as an athlete. Let's see, 7 interceptions. He had 4 interceptions in 2018. 12 pass breakups. A guy who has that tremendous range over the top. Uses that speed to his advantage. Can cover sideline to sideline on the back end. Very reliable tackler coming over the top as well. The durability isn't an issue. I wouldn't say so. This is something, a guy who did play in 11 games and, was productive. He was a guy that teams really kind of shied away from. You had him and Jalen Hawkins on the back end there for the Cal defense, which was really the strength of that team and really carried them to another bowl game, but under Josh Wilcox. I'm sorry, Josh is Justin's brother, Justin Wilcox, but I think that'd be a nice move for them at the end of round number 3. And then you look at the Giants in round number 4. They need a receiver. I absolutely believe that. They re-signed Corey Coleman. He's coming back. So you have a speedster on the outside. You have Golden Tate, and you have Sterling Shepard. What do you have there? Those are 3 receivers who all look the exact same. They feel, they're really the exact same receiver. You have Darius Slayton. I think what really helped him, he was a vertical threat. I believe 5th rounder. You've got a lot of guys who can line up in the slot, but you don't have that big-bodied receiver. And I'm looking at Antonio Gandy Golden out of Liberty, 6'4", 223 pounds. This guy, you look at him, and he is, he looks like he's chiseled out of granite. This is a guy who, big kid, only ran a 4.6 40, but, put up 22 reps in the bench press, 36-inch vertical leap, and still had a 127-inch broad jump, which was among the farthest there among the receivers. So he has some twitchiness to him. Definitely a leaper, a guy who's going to go up and get the football. That's really part of what Gandy Golden is known for. An incredible catch radius. You just put the ball anywhere near him, and he's going to be able to pluck it out of the air with his hands. Very soft hands, very reliable receiver. In his 2 seasons there with the Flames, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, including this past year, really upped his game. 79 receptions, just under 1,400 yards. 17.7 yards per reception and 10 touchdowns. Model of consistency. This is a guy who, like I said, ran a 4.6 40. He's not going to burn past you, but this is a guy who's going to win late. He's also a guy who has a flair for the acrobatic, adjusts very well to the football. He's going to be a red zone nightmare as well. And, I'm looking at him, when you have a guy like Evan Engram at tight end, they brought in Levine Toilolo, who's more of a blocking tight end. This is one of those bigger receivers who he can line up in the slot and really kind of act as one of those receiving tight ends, if you will. Matchup nightmares. Who's going to cover him? Are you going to play a safety over him? Really can't do that. Is he going to be, some of those physical corners on the outside? He's bigger than those guys. So I think he can generate the matchup that Tate, Shepard, Coleman, and really even Darius Slayton, because Slayton's more of a finesse vertical receiver. Those guys aren't going to be able to present the same matchup that Antonio Gandy Golden is going to. So I think that would be a nice fit for the Giants there in round number 4. So transitioning from the Giants to the Dallas Cowboys. So in terms of the first round, number 17 overall. And when you're talking about Dallas, there are a few different directions that they can go, right? And, no question, end of the Jason Garrett era, 8-8 season, failing to make the playoffs for the 6th time in 9 years. Mike McCarthy takes over, and Mike McCarthy at the helm. He's got Kellen Moore that's coming in as his offensive coordinator. Mike Nolan's going to be his defensive coordinator. So it's going to be, I'm really excited to see what happens here. Some continuity on the offensive side of the football. And look, I think Dak Prescott is, the franchise tag was used there for him. They brought in Amari Cooper. I'm sorry, they re-signed Amari Cooper to a 4-year, $100 million deal. So they have him on the roster, have him locked up. They Unfortunately, though, we're not able to re-sign Byron Jones as a result. So you lose the corner. You know that's going to be a direction that you're going to be focused on for sure. You're also going to want to find a replacement for Robert Quinn rushing the passer, because he went to the Bears in free agency as well. So that's another move that they're going to have to make at some point. They bring in Gerald McCoy, who's really listed as a defensive end, but in Carolina, he was mostly a defensive tackle. That's where he played in Tampa, a 3 technique. I think that's really what you're going to be seeing there with Gerald McCoy. Although Mike Nolan running a 3-4, he'll probably end up as a defensive end in a 34 defense. I think he'd be a nice 5 technique. Clinton Dix, they needed a safety, and enter Clinton Dix. He'll line up with Xavier Jones, especially now that Jeff Heath has moved on. Let's see. You're going to need to find a receiver to replace Randall Cobb. You're going to need to find a defensive tackle to replace Malik Collins there up front. He went on to the Raiders, as did Jason Witten. Jeff Heath also went there. So a lot of players that were key pieces that have moved on. So I think that's going to make things interesting to see where Dallas goes with this first pick. And really, I think it's going to be coming down to one of 2 players that they're going to be replacing. Do you want to go corner and replace Byron Jones? Or are you going to go edge rusher and replace Robert Quinn? And there's not really a right or wrong answer there. There's really a need at both. They brought back Anthony Brown as a corner, Chidobe Awuzie, Jordan Lewis. Those are the top returning corners, and they're talented guys, but they don't have a true number 1 corner. CJ Henderson would be a guy that I would keep an eye out for. It's a little too early for Trevin Diggs or Christian Fulton at this point. I think if they were looking for them, they'd probably be looking to try to trade down. CJ Henderson, I just don't see him being available. I think he comes off the board before number 17. I'm actually looking for him with the Jets, especially with the fact that Tremaine Johnson's gone, Darryl Roberts is gone. They need to address that cornerback position in a major way. So I'm looking at CJ Henderson there for the Jets. So with him off the board, I think the focus really has to turn to the pass rush. You've got DeMarcus Lawrence. After him, you have Dorrance Armstrong, Joe Jackson at the defensive end position. And that really gives you cause for concern. The linebacking core, Sean Lee brought back, teaming with Jalen Smith, and then Leighton Vander Esch coming off the neck injury. His health is going to be a concern there as well, but really it's going to be up front. Who's going to be the guy that's going to be really putting the pressure on the quarterback? I'm looking at K'Lavon Chaisson out of LSU, 6'5", 250 pounds, a guy who, he had 13.5 tackles for loss, just 6.5 sacks. Makes me have flashbacks of Barkevious Mingo because their body types are similar. What I look at with K'Lavon Chaisson is the explosiveness coming off the edge. This is a guy who, first step quickness, able to really engage the offensive lineman coming off the ball, plays with excellent leverage. The speed to power is absolutely there, able to drive guys into the backfield with some power. I looking at my notes, the flexibility, the dip, of his inside shoulder to get underneath the offensive tackle's pad level. You definitely see that. Wins with his hands, slapping the offensive tackle's hands away and then ripping through them before flattening out and chasing after the quarterback. Spin moves very compact and quick. Changes it direction in a hurry without any wasted movement. Now he does tend to let the offensive tackles attack his body. That's going to end up making it difficult for him to disengage because he's one of those lean edge rushers. But look, when he gets his hands on the tackle first, he's able to convert, like I said, the speed to power, driving the offensive tackle back, has a really impressive long arm. I mean, if you watch him, he will get that long arm into the offensive tackle's pad level, drive him back, and then be able to use his hands to get off the block and get to the quarterback. So even if he's not getting to the quarterback, he's making plays. He's really affecting the quarterback in the backfield. When LSU faced off against Georgia in the SEC championship, Chason, matched up against Andrew Thomas, who's also known as basically a top 15 pick. Some people would argue that he's a top 10 pick. He won with this explosiveness. Chason did. On one play, started up field, got Thomas leaning, then spin back inside, pulled this up and under. Very nice move. A low center of gravity, got to Jake Fromm, and then on another play, used his speed coming off the edge to beat Thomas. He wasn't able to get his hands on Chason as he got into the backfield. When he let Thomas engage him and get his hands on him, he get easily driven away from the pocket. So that's really what he has to work on. But his nonstop motor, relentless ability in pursuit of the football, very active as an edge rusher, had 60 tackles this past season, knows how to get to locate the football, and the slender frame does keep him from getting off blocks at times. He'll lose contain at times in the running game, but he has the speed to chase running backs down. So if you want to find a game plan for beating Clavin Chason, run at him. If you run away from him, he's going to find a way to work down the line and get to the football. I think if he's on the board at 17, and look, it's a big if Atlanta ends up going, Javon Kinlaw there, then Chason, it would be available. But if Atlanta ends up going with Chason, then, Dallas, could they go AJ Epinesa here? It's entirely possible. Maybe we end up shifting gears and actually looking at a corner. It's going to be interesting to see. And right now I have Javon Kinlaw sitting there at number 16, but this is a guy who's been so explosive, and there is a drop-off after Javon Kinlaw. When you look at these draft classes, and when you have such a discrepancy at the top of the draft, you saw that with the receiving core with the draft where Corey Davis and Mike Williams and John Ross were all drafted in the top 10. There was a huge drop-off at the receiver position after the three of them. I think the offensive tackle position, one of the reasons why we're talking about them, you have Jedrick Wills, you have Tristan Wirfs, you have Mekhi Becton, and you have Andrew Thomas, and then there's a drop-off after them. Same goes for that defensive tackle position. You have Derek Brown out of Auburn, who could potentially be a top 5 pick. Javon Kinlaw, arguably, top 15 guy. There's a big drop-off after that. So I'm looking at, if Isaiah Simmons goes number 4 overall to the Giants, then I think at number 7, Carolina, where I have Isaiah Simmons going right now, really put that and build that defense around him, much like they did with Luke Kuechly. I think you could end up seeing instead Carolina going with Derek Brown. I have Brown going to the Jaguars right now. They're still going to need a defensive tackle because Marcel Darius was a cap casualty. They're going to still need a defensive tackle. So there's a chance that if Brown goes to the Panthers at number 7, then Kinlaw goes to the Jags at number 9. I think it's definitely a possibility that we could see that happen. And if that does happen, then I think Chason's off the board. So we're going to have to take a look at this, like I said, over the next couple of weeks and really make the final call on what is going to happen with Isaiah Simmons. Is Gettleman going to get his right tackle and really, assuredly nail the offensive tackle position, or is he going to go with the best player available and go Isaiah Simmons? It remains to be seen. So, getting back to the Cowboys though, and round number 2 for them, as I mentioned, they need a corner. So if they're able to address the pass rush in round number 1, then I'm looking at them taking a corner in round number 2. And, Cam Dantzler had a chance to be a first rounder, and really didn't get a chance to run a faster 40 time with, the COVID-19 and everything at the combine. Ran a 4.64 40, for a guy who's 6'2" and 187 pounds. That's, it's just not going to cut it. So I think that's why his draft stock is going to fall. But this is a guy who has tremendous ball skills. Look, when you have a guy like T-Buck, Terrell Buckley, as your position coach, and Terrell Buckley played in the league a long time, he knows good cornerback play when he sees it. And Cam Dantzler is a guy who can definitely play on the outside. 6'2", 187, like I said, and 20 pass breakups in his career, including 17 over the last 2 seasons. A guy who has tremendous ball skills. You worry about him getting overpowered by some of the more physical receivers down the field. But he uses his length to his advantage, and you need those long corners. And really, that's what Dallas is looking for. I think if you can get him in round number 2, and Dallas is selecting at number 51, I think that'd be a nice spot for Cam Dantzler to come off the board. I think Dallas will be happy getting a corner there at the beginning of day number 2. So you transition looking at the 3rd round, and mention that the safety position, you have Xavier Jones, you have Clinton Dix. I still think they're going to need another safety, and I'm looking at Kyle Duggar out of Lenoir-Rhyne, and this is a small school kid, but a guy who's absolutely proven, especially at the Senior Bowl, that he absolutely belongs. A guy 6'1", 217 pounds, ran a 4.49 40, a 42-inch vertical leap, really set the combine on fire. The athleticism was off the charts, and this is going to be a guy who I think you really have to keep an eye on throughout the draft. He and Jeremy Chin out of Southern Illinois, the 2 underclassmen at the safety position who are turning heads, really guys that you're looking at saying, these are the guys that I want to keep an eye on. The ball skills are evident. He arrives. He's a physical hitter, a physical presence, and I'm certainly excited to see what Kyle Duggar is going to bring for the Cowboys. Let's see. When you look at him, he played in just 7 games in 2019, but 10 interceptions in his career, 36 pass breakups, 6 fumble recoveries, 6 forced fumbles as well. Kyle Duggar, to me, plays all over the field, and I think you add him to the mix, and you really have solidified that secondary. If you're able to address a corner, get another safety, I think you're feeling a lot better about your secondary, which at times was porous against some of the passing attacks. And you've gone defense with the first 3 picks. So I'm looking at the receiver position in round number 4. And with Dallas, their receivers, yes, they have Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup is a nice number 2. Could have been a number 1 had Amari Cooper left, over 1,000-yard receiver a season ago. There's Cedric Wilson, Devin Smith. These guys, really need to step up. But I'm looking at this defense, and I want to see a big physical presence. So I'm looking at Colin Johnson, number 123 overall. Colin Johnson, 6'6", 222 pounds, out of Texas, the big-bodied wideout. This is a guy who really burst on the scene against USC, had a huge game against them as a sophomore, and then the production just really dropped off after that. You're really waiting for him to have that breakout season. And in 2018 had 68 receptions, 985 yards, 7 touchdowns, battled injuries in 2019, just played in 7 games, still 38 catches, 559 yards, 3 touchdowns, a guy who has a really large center of gravity. You worry about him with the separation. That's really the biggest thing. Wasn't able to compete at the combine in terms of the 40. So you really wanted to see just how fast he was. Is he going to be a guy who can separate vertically? I think what he does do really well is he adjusts to the football, comes back to the ball, attacks the football in the air. A guy who, isn't afraid to go over the middle. He can lay out for a football as well. Pretty good hands, although he has had some easy drops in his career. I think looking at him as a 4th rounder, I think he'll be there when Dallas selects. And if you add him, that's a physical presence to the receiver position. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then finally, the Philadelphia Eagles. Look, the Eagles, in this group, they wound up winning the NFC East, made the wild card appearance, did so with just 9 wins. Would not cut it in most years, but look, Doug Peterson needs to put a premium on weapons for Carson Wentz, who, when healthy, has proven he can play at a high level. But in 2019, the top three receiving threats in Philly were the two tight ends, Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert, and then the running back Miles Sanders, who had a great rookie season. Wentz was also without Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Nelson Aguilar for the final 4 games of the season due to injury. Alshon Jeffrey's coming off the Liz Frank surgery in December. He's still under contract through 2021. There's a sense that J.J. Arcega-Whiteside may be his eventual replacement, though J.J. rather quiet rookie season with just 10 receptions. Deshaun Jackson hasn't played a full season since 2013, and Nelson Aguilar has left for the Raiders. He didn't really showcase reliable enough hands to be counted on, so that's why they were able to let him go. They need a receiver who can stretch defenses, and I'm looking really at Justin Jefferson out of LSU. 6'1", 202, very savvy receiver, a guy who just, he does a good job adjusting his routes to really what the defense is giving him, and really an explosive receiver. Yes, he was playing in Joe Brady's offense, but the talent was absolutely there as well. Led the FBS with 111 receptions, 1,540 receiving yards, and 18 touchdowns. Both finished second in the country. 8 100-yard receiving games, scored a touchdown in 11 of 15 games, including 4 multi-touchdown games, recorded at least 5 receptions in 13 of the 15 games as well. Had 2 games with double-digit receptions. So even though you had Jamar Chase, who was the flashy receiver, this was a guy who was a model of consistency, a guy who just knew how to get open, had a variety of moves to get a quick release off the line. Good job stacking the corner on the vertical routes, tracks the ball well over his shoulder, extends for the football thrown out in front of him as well. Like I said, very savvy route runner, setting up his man, selling his fakes, quickly snapping off his routes, sinking his hips, being very fluid in and out of the breaks to create separation. Tremendous catch radius as well, using those 33-inch arms, to extend for the football. Very soft hands, plucks the ball out of the air easily. Very smooth receiver. And when I look at the Eagles in that receiving core, like I said, with Carson Wentz, you got to have that receiver, a reliable guy. And, to me, he has a chance to be the wide receiver one. He was kind of a, 1A there at LSU. I guess, if Chase was 1A, he was 1B, and it can be vice versa. I'm looking at this team. Deshaun Jackson, his days are numbered just because he can't stay healthy. Alshon Jeffrey, kind of the same thing. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside has to step up to show that he can ultimately replace Jeffrey. Greg Ward Jr. down the stretch was one of their leading receivers. They just have to get better at the skill position, namely the receiver position, and that's going to be, Justin Jefferson. So I think when you look at the Eagles, and if I back up real quick, and we look at the roster itself and some of the moves that Philly has made, you're going to see my computer, if I can get this going, when you look at free agency with them, not a ton of moves were made. Halapoulivaati Vaitai, their swing tackle there. He left for Detroit. Sounds like he's probably going to play guard there. Malcolm Jenkins, the safety, moved on to New Orleans. Jordan Howard, your running back, especially with the way that Miles Sanders played, he knew his days were numbered. He moved to Miami, as did Kamu Grugier-Hill, the linebacker. He moved on to Miami. Mentioned Nelson Aguilar, Will Parks, the safety, was brought in from Denver. Jatavis Brown brought in from the Chargers to play inside backer, and then Javon Hargrave, the big defensive tackle. That was the big get. 3 years, $39 million, and you're going to line him next to Fletcher Cox. When you're talking about that defensive front, my goodness, you've got the two of them in the middle. Javon Hargrave can really hold the point of attack. Then you've got Derek Barnett and Brandon Graham rushing the quarterback. Josh Sweat also showing that he can get to the quarterback a little bit as well. I think, there's a need at the linebacker position right now. You've got Alex Singleton, TJ Edwards, Duke Riley as some of the linebackers there under contract. Not really, really striking fear in opposing offenses. So I think that's going to be some, a move. Jannard Avery's also on the roster. He could potentially be a defensive end, could be potentially a linebacker. Then you look at the secondary. They traded for Darius Slay. I kind of saved that one. Ronald Darby, is leaving in free agency. They needed to get a number one corner, and Darius Slay absolutely made sense. They get the Pro Bowler out of Detroit, teaming up with Avonte Maddox, Sidney Jones, Rasul Douglas. I think that cornerback position looks a lot better now that you add Darius Slay to the roster. Jalen Mills was brought in at strong safety. Rodney McLeod re-signed to play the free safety. And then you have William Parks coming in as well, really kind of solidifying that safety group, especially with Malcolm Jenkins moving on. So Philly, what are they going to be doing in round number 2? I'm actually looking at the guard position. They have Isaac Samalo at left guard, but I'm looking more at the right guard position. Brandon Brooks is a guy who, when healthy, is a pretty darn good guard, but I still worry about him with that Achilles injury. And yes, he's signed through 2025, just signed a 4-year deal, $56.3 million. But I worry about the depth up front. I really look at that, and Isaac Somalo is signed through 2022. So the depth, at the position is virtually non-existent. I'm looking at Netane Muti out of Fresno State. This could potentially change. They could potentially look at a linebacker here, and that's something that I'm going to be looking at with my mocks. I could potentially look at a linebacker. Terrell Lewis is more of a 34 outside linebacker putting pressure on the quarterback, but he's somebody that they could potentially take a look at there in round number 2 if Philly ultimately decides to look for a linebacker in round 3. That's going to be an option for them. And I do have them taking a linebacker in round 3. But I think Netane Muti is going to provide some real physicality to that defense, to that offensive line. Brandon Brooks, like I said, he's 30 years of age, signed through 2024, but I worry about his health. I'm a recovering Achilles injury. Myself, I've had to deal with that, and it's one of those to where you lose a step, and I worry about that for Brandon Brooks. Is he going to be able to really bounce back from that? And, he's fully healthy. He went through his rehab around the same time that I did myself as well. But I think Muti, 44 reps in the bench press, the biggest thing for him is honestly, can he stay healthy? And you look at the ACL tears that he's had. But look, big physical guy, 6'3", 315 pounds, 44 reps in the bench press, a guy who's just a mover. He's a people mover. He's nasty. He looks to finish you. He's going to maul you to death. So I think you put him on that line really solidifies the interior of that offensive line. So Philly is not going to be done. Let's see. In round number 3, mentioned that they were going to be taking a linebacker, but first, before they do that, actually, if I can find them here. Let's see. Philly. Round number 3. So the 85th overall selection, it was traded to Detroit, so they don't have that pick any longer. So they actually look at the 103rd overall selection, and I have them taking Logan Wilson out of Wyoming. 6'2", 241 pounds, tremendous athlete at the linebacker position. I think he played both outside and inside. He's really the linebacker that nobody's talking about, and I think he's going to get drafted a lot higher than people expect. Ran a 4.63 40 at the combine. Put up 21 reps in the bench press as well. And this is a guy who's just he's a volume tackler, but he's much more than that. He's not just going to be somebody who's looking to make plays, tackling the ball carrier in the open field. Yes, he has 409 tackles, but he also makes plays behind the line. 34.5 tackles for loss, 7 sacks, 10 interceptions. So he knows how to drop into coverage, puts himself in a position to make a play, trusts his eyes, and there's no wasted movement. 14 pass breakups, 5 forced fumbles, 4 fumble recoveries. Look, I mentioned those 10 interceptions. 2 of those were returned for touchdown. So this is a guy who is a playmaker at the linebacker position. And look, I think he can start right away. He's talented. You can play him inside, have him battle TJ Edwards, who was an undrafted free agent a season ago coming out of Wisconsin. You can play him at the outside linebacker position. I think Logan Wilson can start for them right away. And I think that's going to be what's really going to be interesting to see if they can bring a guy like him in, what he would do for that linebacking core and really where they would line him up. So Philly, after that, I'm looking at, let's see. I've got them taking Jake Fromm in round number 4. They need a quarterback, and really, I'm looking at Nate Sudfeld is brought in was re-signed. He's going to be the backup right now for Carson Wentz, but Carson Wentz hasn't proven he can stay healthy. And I think what you need is a young quarterback. Jake Fromm could be that guy, 6'2", 219 pounds out of Georgia. We know that he doesn't have the big arm, but a veteran leader, a guy who I think could play behind Carson Wentz, and very intelligent quarterback, knows where to go with the football. I think that makes a ton of sense for me. You put him there in round number 4, and then let's see, who else do we have? I've got them taking another safety in round 4. I'm looking at Alohi Gilman at a Notre Dame. He's kind of stiff in coverage, but he's an intelligent player. Transfer from Navy, really a guy who trusts his eyes, comes downhill, makes a lot of plays. Had 94 tackles as a junior in his first season there with the Irish after transferring from Navy. And just really a heady player, really an intelligent player there. And I think that's going to be a nice move for Philly. Get another safety in there to compete with McLeod and Jalen Mills at the safety position. So that's really what I'm looking at for the NFC East. Next time we're going to go ahead and take a look at the AFC East. We're going to go ahead and see what happens with the New England Patriots without Tom Brady, life without TB12. The Buffalo Bills, what can they do to really build upon a season that really saw them finally get over the hump and get back to the playoffs. Miami, tank for Tua. It looks really good. They'll be able to get Tua a lot of draft picks early on. I think they can really do a lot to rebuild that team for Brian Flores and company. And then the Jets. What's going to happen with the Jets there? They're sitting at number 11 overall. They need to find some weapons for Sam Darnold, but they also need to do a better job protecting him. What has Joe Douglas, the GM, done to really improve that offensive line? He's been busy in this offseason. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the AFC East. I'm going to go ahead and get another podcast together here in the next day or two. And stay tuned for more from ReadyForTheDraft.com and Ready for the Draft podcast. I told you we're going to be sending these podcasts to you fast and furious from here on out. So every few days, expect to see a podcast from me. Hope you've enjoyed the content thus far. And we'll go ahead and bring another one to you, like I said, in a couple of days. So be safe out there, everyone. Be healthy. Use that hand sanitizer. Wash your hands, and take care of that social distancing. We don't want COVID-19 spreading any further. Want everyone to be safe, be healthy, and enjoy your weeks, everyone. And until next time, this has been Gregg Schutze for ReadyForTheDraft.com and the Ready for the Draft podcast. Take care, everyone, and I am out of here.